A pleasant day to you, our dear viewers, and welcome to another video where we will be tackling Lesson 12 of our subject, Entrepreneurial Management, which is Managing Business Risk. I am one of your presenter for today's video, Alea May Al Rayos.
And I am Joyanne Salen, the other presenter of this video.
And together we will be covering interesting topics regarding managing business risk. During the course of the discussion, the following objectives will be met, which are defining business risk, learning how to identify business risk, understanding the ways of managing business risk, defining risk management, differentiating between traditional risk management and enterprise risk management, understanding the risk management process, and developing the risk management plan. And without further ado, let us begin with the first topic as reported by my co-presenter, Joy Ann Salen.
The first topic of this discussion is the definition of business risk. So, what is business risk? Business risk is the exposure a company or an organization has to factors that will lower its profits or make it impossible to achieve desired organizational goals. So, anything that threatens a company's ability to achieve its financial goals is considered as a business risk. It is important to know that the risk that the businesses have because business risk can impact a company's growth and success or its reputation among the clients and consumers. So if it won't be managed properly, the business risk can cause a failure of the company. There are two types of business risk, namely internal and external risk. So these risks are natural elements of growing a business which you can manage by learning common risk management strategies and techniques. The first one is internal risk. It is a risk that exists within the organization. It can be thought of as any risk that can be identified and managed by the same organization. So internal risk arises during the normal operations of the business. It can be forecasted with the reliability. So it is possible for the organization to minimize or reduce the internal business risk. Internal risk can fall into several categories. So the first one is human risk. This type of risk encompasses any situation in which an employee failed to perform their jobs correctly due to lapses in judgment or skill set deficits. It is also important to note that human factor risk may not always be limited to individuals that are acting outside their job descriptions. So, those employees who are not informed of the company's changes of policies and procedures can also contribute to human risk. So, some of the examples of human risk are union strikes, dishonesty by employees, and ineffective management or leadership. Second is technological risk. So this type of risk refers predominantly to errors caused by faulty technology or outdated equipment in the company. It can be something as simple as a server going offline or a glitch in the software. So it includes unforeseen changes in the manufacturing or delivery or distribution of a company's product or service. For example, if the operating systems or the technologies used by the company are outdated, the data that comes out may not be as accurate or may cause disruption in the operations of the business. So the third type of internal risk is the physical risk. Physical risk is when something happens that causes damage or loss for the company's assets like buildings, equipment, and even the employees. So physical risk can take many forms, including injury to employees or from improper training or lack of building maintenance and even the theft. The other type of business risk is the external risk. So external risks are those risks that you have no control over. These are often referred to as black swans or events with low predictability and high impact that can cause major disruptions in the organization. So these are the risks that are not controlled by the company. So it is difficult to prevent or reduce them. In External risks are extremely dangerous because they can expose a company to things that cannot be controlled or predicted. Just like internal risk, external risk can also fall into several categories. So the first one is natural risk. Natural risks are threats that are related to natural disasters and other uncontrollable events such as hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, thunderstorms, and floods. For example, there was a typhoon, so the businesses, especially the small ones, can be affected by the said typhoon. If the typhoon causes severe damage, businesses may not be able to open immediately after the um, typhoon, and their normal operation will be affected, and that can lead to a decline in the business sales. So the second one is political risk. So political risk is any unexpected changes brought about by governmental actions or inaction. So an example of this is the legislation or trade policy. It is comprised of changes in the political environment or governmental policy that relates to financial affairs, such as the changes in export laws, tariffs, taxes, and other regulations that all may affect any business negatively. So the third and last one is the economic risk. Economic risk refers specifically to financial matters within a country rather than between countries. So they are usually caused by fluctuations in monetary value due to either directly or indirectly through market forces like inflation or deflation. So economic risk includes changes in market conditions. So for example, the overall economic downturn can lead to a sudden and unexpected loss of revenue to the business. So when there is a recession or the unemployment in the country or the community increases, the purchasing power of the customers will decrease, and those decrease in economic power will result in a decrease in the profitability of the business. So companies can respond to the economic risk by cutting costs or diversifying their client base so that the revenue is not solely reliant on one segment or one geographic region only. Aside from internal and external risk, there are some other common types of business risk. So the first one is compliance risk, or also known as the integrity risk. So this risk refers to a situation when a company's reputation or finances are at risk due to violating external regulations or internal standards. It may expose the company to penalties or material loss. These are the risks that the company experiences if they ever fail to comply with the laws and regulations provided by the government or other authorities. So, for example, the company breaches the contract with the customers or other related parties, or if they get involved in illegal operations, and if ever they fail to comply with the health and safety protocols. So, the second one is legal risk. The common causes of legal risk involves the lack of awareness or misunderstanding of the way the law and regulations apply to a business. It may refer to a company's internal processes, products, services, or relationships with the business, and may cause a lot of expenses since there's a lot of procedures that needed to be considered in managing legal risk. Here are the subtypes of legal risk. So first is the contractual risk. A contractual risk occurs when a company doesn't fulfill the obligations for liabilities in a business contract. This is when a company has an obligation to a client or to another party, but they have not fulfilled it or they breached the contract. And that is when there will be a contractual risk between the parties. The second risk is the dispute risk. So a dispute risk happens when a legal conflict with a customer, stakeholder, or community member interrupts a business's process. So, this is the risk that occurs if the customers, stakeholders, or employees have a misunderstanding or some other problems that may cause an interruptions in the business operations. Regulatory risk can happen if a government regulator or withdraws a company's license to operate. So, in here, there's a risk if the business has a problem against the government or if they have violated regulations that can cause the loss of franchise or license to operate. Next is strategic risk. It refers to certain events that are both internal and external that may make it impossible for a company to accomplish its objective and strategic goals. So it arises when a business does not operate according to its business model or plan. A business must have a proper plan or goals and vision, and the strategies that will implement are proper and will surely help to achieve those goals. If there is ever a problem with the strategies they will implement, say for instance, they use low quality machines to save money, but they spend a lot of money or budget on the things that do not directly help the normal operations of the business to achieve the business goal, then there will be a strategic risk. So, all strategies should be aligned with the objectives of the business in order to avoid strategic risk because it is often not easy to solve. The other common type of business risk is reputational risk. So, reputational risk refers to an event or change that dangers to a company's good name and reputation. Um, Risks of this type are especially threatening to a business because they may cause the stakeholders to lose confidence in the organization. So, as I mentioned, it is a risk about the name and reputation of the business. So, when there is a reputational risk, the feedback or what the customers say about the business is mostly negative. So the profitability of the organization may be affected by this, as well as the willingness of the stakeholders to have a share from the business since they too are affected by this reputational risk. Next is operational risk. Operational risk is an internal or external risk that is closely related to the way the company operates. So, operational risk management takes into consideration the company's day-to-day activities and the processes to make sure that all internal systems and external factors are in the company's favor. There are several types of operational risk, including employee errors, damage to assets, and external fraud. So, in employee errors, a business can experience a threat to its operations if the employees make a significant mistake at work. So, those errors or other mistakes that employees omit in the workplace, um, even if it is just a simple mistake, may affect the operations of the business. So, the employee errors are considered as a threat or risk to the business. So, the other one is damage to assets. A natural disaster can damage a company's physical assets, which is an operational risk. An example of this is when there is a fire in the warehouse or there is a flood, then the assets or other items that are badly needed in the business operations may be damaged or affected by the disaster. So, it is also considered as an operational risk. So the last one is external fraud. When a company experiences an external fraud, such as theft by a third party, then that theft is presented as an operational risk to the company. Next is security risk. A company can face dangerous security risk when it fails to develop and maintain strong security strategies. This also refers to cybersecurity processes, such as insufficient policies for the security updates of the company. If the security of the business is not that strict on their data, for instance, it may be accessed by third parties through the malware or other viruses that can cause harm to the business and can also leak some important informations. So the other common type of business risk is the financial risk. Financial risks are events and situations that results of a company's poor debt management or financial planning. So this financial risk is dangerous to a business because if it's not managed well, it can cause a great damage to the organization and because it may result in a huge loss in the capital of the business, and the worst thing is that um, it can cause the operation to be stopped. So the following are the common types of financial risk that businesses experience. So first is currency risk. A business can experience currency risk in an international business dealings since foreign currency's value can depreciate unexpectedly. An example of this is the losses caused by foreign exchange transactions when the value of the money to be exchanged for the currency used by the business is low. So the second one is default risk. Taking out a business loan with greater interest than a company can afford can put a company at risk of defaulting or not paying the loan. So it is a risk on the side of the lender. So when the borrower does not pay the loan on the agreed date of payment. Say for example, the business lend 100,000 pesos. However, there is an uncertainty that the borrower cannot pay the loan on time. So the lender is at risk because it will be a loss of the business, and that is what we call default risk. Third one is liquidity risk. A company faces a liquidity risk when it cannot be quickly converted its asset into cash. This is the risk that businesses experience when they don't have enough liquid assets or those assets that can be easily converted into cash. So, in order to pay um, short-term obligations, this is a risk because it can cause us losses to the business if it won't be managed properly. Lastly is the competition risk. So competition risk is the risk associated with two or more companies competing with one another. It pertains to the possibility that the customers of the business will lose or will be reduced because of the competition, and this risk prevent the growth and success of the business. Say for example, this may occur when multiple businesses are selling the same or similar products, or when the different companies aim to meet the same customers' needs. So, there are multiple types of competition that companies may consider when creating their risk management strategies, including direct competition, indirect competition, potential competition, and future competition. So, direct competition, it is the competition between the businesses that offers the same product or services and compete for the same market. An example of this competition is the competition between McDonald's and Jollibee. So, the indirect competition, on the other hand, it is the competition between businesses that offers slightly different products or services from the same category, but their target the same group of customers with the same goal of satisfying the same customer needs. So an example of this competition is um, the competition between the Starbucks and McDonald's company. So the next one is potential competition. It refers to the competitive constraint on the behavior of the business that may potentially arise in the future, but not yet actually done so. Or it is possible for those businesses that aren't in the market at the moment, but may enter the market in the future. So future competition, on the other hand, it is almost the same with the potential competition. But in here, the future competitors are much more ready and likely to enter the same market. So we are done with the definition and types of business risk. So let's now proceed to the risk identification. So risk identification is a process of identifying and assessing threats to our organization, its operations, and its workforce. So it is important for the management to know the potential risk of the business that could negatively affect its operations in terms of performance, quality, damage, loss, or reputations, and to assess what measures are needed to be taken to prevent the big damage caused by the said risks. There are 8 ways to identify the risk in the organization. So number one is to break down big picture. Risk is multifaceted. I mentioned earlier the different types of risk. So from the whole organization, it needed to be broken down into different areas. So it will be easier for the management to see the weakness in each department and locate the risk. Um, Questioning what are the most obvious things that could go wrong in the company based on its business strategy and daily activities is also important because it will have a huge effect on the overall situation of the business, and the management can take an action after answering that question. Number two, be pessimistic. So, what is the worst thing that could happen to the organization? So, although it is not really a good thing to do since being pessimistic is a negative behavior, however, it is somehow beneficial in identifying business risk. By being a pessimist, the negative occurrences that can happen in business can be considered more, and in that way, the organization can plan ahead to avoid the risk, or if they cannot be avoided, at least they are prepared for what should be done or to minimize the risk if ever that risk occurred to the business. So the number three is consult an expert. It is also important to consult an expert to identify the risk of the business because they have more insights and suggestions that can help to minimize the risk and properly manage it so as to not cause the major damages to the business. Um, Businesses have different connections to different people, so it is not difficult to seek advice from experts such as insurance broker, accountant, or financial advisors that can help the business to identify risks. So the insurance brokers know your claim history. That means they can provide insights regarding the trends in the business. So they can help in assessing business risk, and they may also recommend some insurance coverage that can help to protect the business in case the risk occurs. And similarly, um, accountants and financial advisors will have an insights on the types of payments you are repeatedly making. They are experts in terms of finances, so they know a lot about what to do to minimize or avoid the financial risk that businesses may experience. They can also advise and identify financial risks throughout the organization. Number four is to conduct internal research. With the data and trend analysis, you can identify the root causes of occurrences. Incidents and near misses are key indicators of the problem areas that need to be addressed by the risk management team. Um, Conducting an internal research can help to identify or recognize the areas within the business that are not being done correctly and can cause risk to the business. So number five is to conduct external research. Every industry has its own unique trends and common occurrences. You can learn a lot about identifying risk from those who have gone before you. Um, in conducting an internal research, you can get an idea um, from the other businesses in the same industry or those businesses the same as yours about the risks that are commonly experiencing in such business organizations, and what should be done to manage the risk and avoid further damage. Number six is to seek employee feedback regularly. So everyone from the frontline staff to the CEO will have a different perspectives of the organizations and the risk they came across while performing their job. So as such, employees are one of the most valuable resources in identifying risks. So employees are the first hand who experience the day-to-day operations of the business, so they have many insights about the risk they experience while working. So through this, even the small things that may cause risk to the business will be considered, and the employees and the management can also have discussions and um, they can also brainstorm to identify some other risks and um, give some suggestions on how to better manage those risks. Number seven, analyze customer complaints. So it is important to seek feedback from the customers since they are one of the reasons why the businesses gain profit. And the management can also consider the question, what do customers most often complain about or what type of issues do they report? So by taking some feedback from customers, the management can also know the most common complaints of the customers regarding the business operations. So after getting the customer's feedback, the management should focus on the most common complaints because those complaints can lead to reputational risk, which is harmful to the business. Number eight is use model or software. So there's a lot of strategies that can help the organization to identify and classify risk, such as simulations, scenario role playing, SWOT analysis, flow charts, and risk mapping. So those are some of the strategies that can help identify and classify risk. So through this, the possible scenarios will be better visualized and the determination of risk will be more organized. So when the management will perform a plan to manage the risk, it won't be too difficult for them since they will have a better guide on how to do things to manage the business risks. The third topic in the discussion is managing business risk. So there are four ways to manage business risk. Number one, risk acceptance. So in risk acceptance, a risk is accepted with no actions taken to mitigate it. So it is a good strategy for small risks that won't greatly affect or cause damage to the business. So sometimes the cost to mitigate the risk is greater than the cost of the risk itself. So if the risk is not too big to cause a huge problem to the organization, it is better to just accept it. Um, it is best to accept the risk only when it has a low chance of occurring or will have a minimal impact to the organization when it occurs. So number two is risk avoidance. So in this way to manage risk, a risk is eliminated by not taking any actions that would mean the risk could occur. Risk avoidance is used in risk that have a major impact to the business when they occur. So, for example, the business considers having an investment, but after analyzing it, there's a lot of risk associated with this investment. So, the management decided to not make an investment anymore. Number three is risk transference. So in risk transference, a risk is transferred via a contract to an external party who will assume the risk of an organization's behalf. So it is not often used and it is only possible if there are other businesses that are involved in the transactions. So transferring the risk do not entirely eradicate it. The risk still exists, however, the impact of it was just transferred to another organization. So normally, there is a contract agreed upon by the two businesses involved in this transactions. So, for example, you have a transport business that is responsible in transporting goods from one place to another, and you have an agreement with an insurance company that they will bear the risk of your business. So, if the vehicle belonging to your business is involved in an accident and the goods that it is carrying is damaged, the insurance company will deal with the risk caused by the accident since you have already transferred the obligations to them. The last way to manage risk is the risk reduction. So, in risk reduction, a risk becomes less severe through the actions taken to prevent or minimize its impact. It is a common strategy when it comes to risk management. So, the business can set an acceptable level of risk that they can tolerate, and if the risk is too much to the point that it exceeds the set risk level, they can apply the risk reduction. So, one of the example of risk reduction strategy is the diversification of investment. So, we already are familiar with this topic since it was already discussed in other subjects. And as we all know, in diversification, so when we invest, we should not invest in just a single market only because it is prone to the risk of having huge amount of losses. So diversification reduces the risk since the investment is allocated into different areas. So that ends my discussion, and the other topics will be discussed by Ms. Alea Rayos.
Hello and welcome to this part of the video where we will be discussing risk management. This is a significant topic we need to cover when discussing managing business risk. My co-presenter has already mentioned a thing or two about risk management, especially during her discussion about ways of managing risk. So even from the name itself, you already have an idea about this topic, but allow me to enlighten you further. So what is risk management? Risk management is the process of identifying, assessing, and controlling the risk factors of the organization. This includes, but not limited to, financial, legal, strategic, and security risks. These risks stem from a range of sources, which may be from financial uncertainties, legal liabilities, technology issues, errors, particularly in strategic management, accidents, and even natural disasters. Some risks that are unforeseen can cause minor impacts on the organization, such as a minor impact on its overhead costs. On the other hand, many of such risks produce a significant impact that could seriously threaten the organization. The worst that could happen is that the risk has caused a catastrophic situation, resulting in a large financial burden, or perhaps even the closure of the organization. This is why risk management is crucial for an organization, to mitigate these risks that can cause potential threats in their operations. This is where effective risk management comes in. Effective risk management is all about control. It aims to control future events to the greatest extent by acting proactively rather than reactively. So instead of waiting for a problem to occur and applying a solution that is thought of on the spot, effective risk management is concerned with predicting the potential problems that may occur and taking action to control the situation. Therefore, effective risk management offers the potential to reduce both the possibility of a risk from occurring and its potential impact. Note how I said it is about reducing a risk and not eliminating. This is because in the modern time, risk management is not applied for the purpose of not having risks, as not all risks are bad. Just like people, organizations need to take risks in order to grow. It just so happens that the risks they take are careful and measured. Just like the quote by Forrester Research Senior Analyst Ala Valente, we manage risks so we know which risks are worth taking, which ones will get us to our goal, which ones have enough of a payout to even take them. Again, this is done through proactive actions. However, it cannot be ruled out that organizations do not act reactively to risks as well. You see, risk management can be practiced in two ways. There is traditional risk management and enterprise risk management, or simply ERM. They are similar in terms of purpose, which is to attempt to minimize the impact of risk on an organization by means of identification and analysis. However, their point of difference is in the way they do this. To get a better point of difference, experts pin on their timing. Traditional risk management is often performed after an accident has occurred and is done in order to avoid a similar situation from occurring again. ERM, on the other hand, is future-looking and seeks to predict probable events and circumstances that may or may not happen. ERM is used to consider the entire perspective. An enterprise risk management plan includes the capacity to monitor market trends, determine how the organization will react to changes in the industry, and develop strategic objectives to provide the organization with an edge over others. But other than this, there are other aspects about them that are different from each other, such as their scope. Traditional risk management only considers risks that can be insured. For example, an employee accidentally falling off the staircase and fracturing their leg, or a fire destroying an area of a building are both hazards that may be insured. On the other hand, ERM accounts for these more traditional risks while also assisting in the identification of risks that are not insurable. In other words, these are risks that can be extremely costly and that no amount of money can compensate for. An example of this is when an organization suffers a data breach and hackers expose sensitive information into the public domain. Following this, there is the difference in their adaptability. Traditional risk management is widely used in the business world, and as a result, it has become highly standardized. COSO and ISO 31000 are the two most commonly used standards by businesses to manage risks. Despite the fact that both of these criteria have been updated to some extent on the benefits of taking risks and reaping the rewards, they remain significantly tilted towards risk management and avoidance. Whereas ERM is significantly more dynamic and allows for far greater case-by-case adaptation. No two organizations are the same, and certainly no two organizations are operated in the same way. Some business owners are more conservative, while others are inclined to being impulsive and risk-taking. ERM program is undoubtedly focused towards the latter. And lastly, these two are different in terms of mindset. Traditional risk management has a risk-averse mindset. This means they view risks in a negative light, only perceiving risks as potential causes of loss for the organization, rather than as opportunities for development and expansion. But as we know, risks coexist with opportunities, and ERM works to evaluate which risks are worth taking and which should be avoided entirely. It can be considered that they have a risk-taking mindset or are risk-tolerant. ERM programs assist business owners and board of directors in making informed decisions. They also collaborate with management teams to decide which risks are much too high and which have the potential to yield a lot of gain. In the modern time, organizations prefer enterprise risk management as it provides management with a framework for evaluating risk as an opportunity to improve their competitive positions and capitalize on certain markets and operational situations. As explained, ERM is a flexible approach to risk management that looks out for the organization in the future. It is considerably more advantageous, particularly in the aspects of its timing, which predicts events like the COVID-19 pandemic. However, there are still few organizations that practice traditional risk management. After learning about traditional risk management and enterprise risk management, we move to the next part of this video, which is about the risk management process. The risk management process is a continuous process that involves the identification, treatment, and ultimately the management of possible risks. This will aid the organization to manage and monitor risks which are necessary in order to safeguard the organization from adverse circumstances. It is basically a framework for risk management which defines the actions that the organization needs to take. In this case, the process helps the organization to prepare for risks and mitigate their impact before they become a serious issue. There are 5 basic steps in the risk management process, which follows in the order of Step 1, identify the risk, Step 2, analyze the risk, Step 3, evaluate or rank the risk, Step 4, treat the risk, and Step 5, monitor and review the risk. The first step is identify the risk. This involves determining the risk that the organization faces from its workforce to its operational environment. Therefore, it is about anticipating the possible problem or issue that may occur within the organization. A few examples of risks that may be identified are legal risks, environmental risks, market risks, regulatory risks, among others. Knowing what are the possible risks of the organization is important, but being aware of the type of risk is critical to the risk management process. They can be classified into 4 main categories, which are hazard risks, such as accidents like fire or injury, operational risks, such as in the form of turnover and supplier failure, financial risks, such as economic recession, and strategic risks, such as new competitors and brand reputation. So, the previous presenter has extensively discussed the different ways an organization can identify risks. But mainly, the risk of an organization can be identified through their experience and internal history, consultation with industry professionals, and external research. As we know, the risk environment is continuously changing, and therefore it is important that this first step in the risk management process is regularly revisited and revised. The next step is to analyze the risk. This is about digging a little deeper at what the organization has identified. It's time to think about what are the possibilities that the risk will likely occur, and if they do occur, what will the impact be? How will the organization respond to it? The purpose of this is to have a better understanding of the organization's exposure to each risk that may have an impact on its operations and goals in the short, medium, and long term. To do this, it is essential to comprehend the relationship between risk and other aspects of the organization. In order to determine the degree and significance of the risk, how many affected business operations should be considered. There are risks that, if realized, can bring the entire organization to a halt, while others will merely cause minor issues in the analysis. As a result, the analysis will guide your risk response and management strategy, which will result in protecting the organization's assets, improve enterprise-wide decision-making, optimize operational efficiency, avoid material damage, and save money, time, and resources. Moving on, the next step is evaluate or rank the risk. This step involves ranking and prioritizing the risks that have been identified and analyzed in the previous steps. Depending on the severity of the risks, most risk management solutions can be classified in a variety of rated categories. Risks that may cause minor issues are rated low, whereas risks that may cause catastrophic damage are rated highest. The process of ranking risk is important because it helps the company to acquire a holistic perspective of the organization's risk exposure. The company may be subject to a number of low-level risks, but they may not necessitate the intervention of upper management. On the other hand, even one of the highest rated hazards is sufficient enough to demand rapid action. In this step, risk assessment is performed, and there are of 2 types: qualitative risk assessment and quantitative risk assessment. Qualitative risk assessment is the process of learning and evaluating an event or regulatory control and understanding the quality of its implementation. This is derived from subjectivity and the knowledge of the assessor. Risk assessments are essentially qualitative as the majority of risks are not quantifiable. For example, the risk of climate change, which many corporations are increasingly concentrating on, is not quantifiable in its entirety, but only certain components of it can be quantifiable. There must be a means to conduct qualitative risk assessment while maintaining objectivity and consistency throughout the organization. though it is possible to derive metrics from risks. These quantifiable risks are assessed under quantitative risk assessment. This is a type of risk assessment that focuses on the numerical values of the risks that are present. This is concerned with measurable and frequently predefined data. Quantitative risk assessments are the best way for assessing financial risk. This is primarily because it largely deals with numbers, whether that number be money, metrics, interest rates, or any other data point that is crucial for financial risk assessments. Quantitative risk assessments are more objective and easier to automate than qualitative risk assessments. The following step in this process is to treat the risk. Risk treatment involves implementing controls, policies, and procedures to avoid, minimize, or mitigate identified risks. This is the point of dispatching the organization's treatment plan to mitigate the risk and its impact, possibly to eliminate those risks with harmful effects. Generally, there are 4 risk responses that an organization can choose: avoid risk, accept risk, transfer risk, and reduce risk. Again, these were discussed extensively by my co-presenter. The risk response chosen will differ depending on the risk's likelihood and impact. For effective risk management, these options must be linked to concrete action. Effectively treating and mitigating risks also entails making optimum use of the organization's resources without disrupting its operations. As time passes and the organization accumulates a larger database of risk records, one will be able to foresee potential risks, enabling them to take a more proactive rather than reactive approach to more effective risk treatment. And the last step here is monitor and review the risk. Risk management is not a project that can be finished and then abandoned. Therefore, the process should be regularly revisited. To reduce the organization's risk exposure, it is critical to continuously monitor the risk landscape. The risk should be monitored throughout the organization's life cycle so that they can be controlled. One must determine the effectiveness of the efforts and whether improvements or updates are necessary. If the adopted approach is ineffective, the team may have to begin again with a new process. If new risks are identified, ensure to update the risk management plan, risk register, and risk responses. An updated register and strategy will aid in active risk management, allowing the organization to minimize more risk than previous reactive methods. In step 5 of the risk management process, I mentioned about updating the risk management plan. This is actually a crucial document in this process. So, what is it exactly? The risk management plan specifies how the risk management process for the organization will be carried out. This comprises the funding, tools, and procedures to be utilized for risk identification, assessment, mitigation, and monitoring. A risk management plan helps an organization to anticipate possible risks and mitigate their adverse effects. The 6 steps of the risk management plan are as follows. Step 1, set objectives. Step 2, risk identification. Step 3, risk assessment. Step 4, risk analysis. Step 5, determine risk tolerance. And Step 6, create risk mitigation strategies. As it can be observed, there are certain steps in the development of the risk management plan that are the same as the risk management process, but organized differently to accommodate the other steps of the plan. The plan begins with Step 1, set objectives. Setting objectives aids the organization to clarify their goals while also acting as a guide for what processes and procedures they ought to implement. The risk management process must align with current and future goals by starting with the organization's objectives. One needs to evaluate these objectives in order for them to get an idea of what risks they might face that would hinder them from meeting these objectives. To set objectives is an important step to risk identification, which is the second step of the risk management plan. The second step is risk identification. I have discussed this previously in the risk management process, but let us go through it again briefly. So again, this is about identifying the threats to an organization, its operations, and its workforce. Failure to undertake risk identification and detect risk ahead of time can result in a variety of unfavorable financial consequences that do not mitigate the impact of the risk. Formalizing the process for identifying new risks allows one to take a step back and determine certain risks that would not have been discovered otherwise if adequate efforts have not been invested in these crucial aspects of the risk management plan. Following this step, there is step 3, risk assessment. As previously discussed, risk assessment is about categorizing each risk based on its likelihood of it occurring and its severity to determine the potential outcomes and prioritize activities to mitigate the risk. It is imperative that risk assessment must be conducted as it enables the organization to truly determine the severity of potential risks, even if they may be a positive one, as it can lead to a negative one. To illustrate, let us say that a business found that the early delivery of a product, which is considered as a positive risk, actually led to a negative risk because the customer is unable to fulfill the payment schedule. As a result, the organization will brainstorm to assess the potential implications. In application of the previous step, we move on to step 4, risk analysis. This involves estimating the likelihood of the risk and its potential impact. Do not confuse this with risk assessment, as that is concerned with categorizing, whereas risk analysis is concerned with estimating. But in the risk management process, both risk assessment and risk analysis are used interchangeably in step 3, which is to evaluate or rank the risks. But back to the main topic. Risk analysis employs a risk management tool known as a risk assessment matrix, which is often used to illustrate the potential impacts of risk. Here is what it looks like. On one axis, one rates the likelihood of the risk from low to high, and on the other axis, they rate its severity from low to high. Risk events in the top right quadrant should be targeted first due to their high probability of occurring and its worst severity. Next is step 5, determining risk tolerance. So first, let us define risk tolerance. This is the risk exposure that an organization is able to take. Therefore, this step is concerned with clarifying what is and what is not an acceptable risk exposure, allowing the organization to clearly know what risk exposure it can accept and which risks it must avoid. Setting a risk tolerance ensures that the organization takes risk decisions and manages risk exposures in accordance with predetermined expectations. Furthermore, this allows the organization to compare actual risk exposures to allowed risk exposures, permitting it to assess if it needs to do more or less to manage the identified risk or risk portfolio. And lastly, there is step 6, which is to create risk mitigation strategies. This step involves designing strategies specifically made to mitigate the likelihood of risks from occurring, as well as the severity of their impact. Again, as previously discussed by my co-presenter, there are 4 effective strategies that can be applied, which are avoidance, acceptance, transference, and reduction. As a result, this section should include mitigation actions, dependencies, risk response, and contingency plans. In this phase, risk monitoring activities should also be designed so that the organization can ascertain if prevention and mitigation actions have been effective as planned. This step is aligned with step 4, treat the risk, and step 5, monitor and review the risk in the risk management process. And after following these 6 steps, you have now developed an organization's risk management plan. And with this, we have now covered all there is needed to be learned in managing business risk. We have covered them step by step from defining business risk to developing a risk management plan. I hope you have absorbed the knowledge we have provided in this video and that you will be able to apply them in your future endeavors. Thank you for being with us today and happy future learning.